Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Knight Tales. Before we dive in, please show your support, give this video a like and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. So let's get started. The first story. There are monsters in my town that do not flay or maim. My uncle Chauncey was killed by a monster around 3 years back. It wasn't a rumor or a secret, it was a fact, something everybody knew cause, well, they saw it. But in my town, a little hamlet on the edge of West Nowhere, Oklahoma, getting killed by a monster isn't that uncommon. It didn't even make the front page of the paper if you can believe it. On July 7, 2018, the day after Uncle Chauncey's death, page 1 had a bright, beaming picture of Maudette Cooper holding up a slice of her blue ribbon peach cobbler at the farmer's fair. As I understood it, her secret was nutmeg and a touch of Thailand chili paste for just a tickle of kick. On page 2, you would have seen a headline, "Local carpenter gutted by the patchwork man." That was Chauncey. Sounds awful grim, right? But round here, we're up to our eyeballs in patchwork men and leg-long harvesters and silent singers. That's our normal. They all have rules and if you know 'em and follow 'em, you survive. We cope because deep down we all know that a death like my uncle's, while tragic, was more like than not, caused by something foolish he did. He died knowing which rule he broke, and we knew that he knew. Simple as that. Now, other than the monsters and horrors and window tappers and coffin coffers, it's actually a pretty nice place to call home. Folks are kindly in a way you don't see too much anymore. Folks are simple, hard-working, and at the end of the day, they go home to their families and crack a bottle and share the stories of the day around the supper table. Sometimes a tapper comes tapping, but we all know to toast to its health, pretend to drink and never to look. A tiny hardship if you know the rules. Our biggest cause of death isn't actually monsters. It's something out-towners might relate to a bit more. Car accidents. Nothing supernatural there, just folks driving too fast and hitting trees and such. They kill just the same as a flaying or getting pressed into human noodles, but I suppose someone might see death in a car as nicer. My cousin, Wallace, got into one such accident a year ago, but he lived from it. I suppose you might say that he broke a rule too, that it was a lead foot that totaled his Chevrolet and put him in a hospital 2 towns over. But the truth of it was, he was heading to catch the birth of his daughter. His wife Eileen had gone into labor a touch early, and Wallace was still at the mill when the word got back to him. Eileen was fine, by the way, overstressed at Wallace taking his time, but the baby came and Eileen rubbed a blood X on little Mabel's forehead to protect her from the widow of the wood. A tiny hardship. When Wallace got home, patched up by a doc with tools and scans and stuff, he said he had a dent in his heart for his Chevy far worse than the dents in his body. Minor bumps and bruises in other words, but he walked a little crooked and he shut his eyes and grunted whenever he stood or sat. That was last year, a time I try to remember fondly. I remember thinking that, even as a new baby, Mabel was the prettiest little thing. She had a full head of hair and these little wispy curls and eyelashes longer than them of Jeremiah Stevens' cow, Delilah. She was perfect. And on account of Wallace's bad back, it fell to me and Eileen to do most of the playing with her. We had to follow the rules for Wallace too. One day, he was salting his greens and had a fit of pain in his shoulder, I guess. He dropped the salt shaker. Salt got on the floor. There's a rule for that. Eileen started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The doorknob started rattling and as I shouted for Wallace to pick up the salt and toss it behind him, he just held his shoulder and hollered for his medicine. I heard Eileen's 20 Mississippi, 21 Mississippi vanish into the bathroom. The rattling got louder. Mabel started crying. And I tried not to remember what happened to Bruce Sturge's family when he lost his salt into a floor vent the winter I turned 7. Eileen returned on 43 Mississippi. Something about seeing that orange bottle of pills seemed to give Wallace the courage to fight the pain. He reached down, screamed like a banshee and grabbed a pinch from the rug. 56 Mississippi, 57 Mississippi. The rattling had stopped, and I watched the doorknob slowly turning. Eileen was clutching Mabel to her chest, bawling and staring at the door and then at Wallace. 59 Mississippi. Wallace grunted and the doorknob snapped back to rest. He did it. He threw the salt. We were safe. but I had never seen Eileen look so scared or angry as she did when she looked down at Wallace. That was the last day I saw my cousin alive. School had started up not long after, and through my mama, I learned that Wallace had left the house and was staying with a friend. Better to put a grown-up's life in danger than a baby's, I suppose. I did keep in touch with him for a while. We'd talk on the phone and I'd tell him stories about Mabel and remind him to follow the rules. He said he would. He'd even thanked me at first, for helping out. But after a while, he'd just yammer at me for being lucky enough to see his family. Either that, or he'd slip into silence on the line. I felt for him, I really did. Particularly when I got home from school one day and my mama gave me a brand new rule: if Wallace ever comes around, you do not let him into this house, you hear? Just tell him to go away. This one didn't feel like a tiny hardship. It felt like hanging family out to dry. But 2 days later, when he came by knocking on the door while my mama was out, I followed the rule. He told me he had a gift for me, something special he had hidden in our house. A part of me thought that the real gift would be seeing Wallace's face, but my mama is my mama. She gave me a rule, and in my town, rules keep you alive. So I told him to go away. After that, I didn't hear about Wallace for months. He didn't call, and when I tried his number, the line was disconnected. What with him vanishing like that, and no one speaking his name, I figured partly that he might have been taken by the jailer of Jacob's Junction. It was one of the monsters on the outskirts of town, one that had a train that always circled this one small loop of track. The jailer's train had a basement though, and once you walked those stairs, you faded from the minds of all but one person in the life you left behind. It seemed to fit, but to my mind, Wallace probably hadn't killed a critter in the woods and left it there to rot. So maybe not. You know, it's a hard thing to have a person you love just disappear. I searched for Wallace in my memories. I wondered what he'd done wrong, where he'd gone, and from time to time, I'd climb up onto the roof with my daddy's old binoculars, and I'd look for him through the trees. I never saw him, though. And then, 2 weeks ago, my mama told me he had died. I asked her how a dozen times before she named the monster that killed him. A new one. A new rule. Another tiny hardship sat beside the grave of someone I counted as a friend, but when I asked her what the new rule was, she just shook her head and said, "I don't know, sweetie. Our monsters, they all have rules, and if you know 'em and follow 'em, you survive. But what happens when the rule doesn't come to you? When those that suffered before never pass the rule along?" I wondered that as I sat one pew back from little Mabel and Eileen at Wallace's funeral. They cried and I cried too. But I also worried. Wallace had broken a rule without knowing it. Where was the foolishness? Where was the faith in doing right? After the wake, I decided to climb up on the roof and look for Wallace one last time. I had seen him in his coffin, but the paper didn't name the monster that killed him. All it said was, "Father and husband died suddenly." Suddenly. As if death ever really feels expected in the moment it comes. I panned the trees. The empty spaces between. I looked for the better part of an hour. Nothing, and then, as I was climbing down, my foot slipped. I fell. I felt pain in my leg and hurt ringing in my ears. My mama called an ambulance. I wailed the whole ride to the hospital. Compound fracture. A fancy way of saying your inside bones are on the outside now. That part I understood. I had seen bones before. Blood. I coped because I knew that bodies break, and I touched the bone so it wouldn't get stolen by the harvester. A tiny hardship made tinier still by all the pain. But when I awoke with a cast on my leg, after the doc had patched me up and the pain was only speaking instead of screaming, I saw a nurse at my bedside. She had a shot in her hand and she brought it to a tube coming out of my arm. "It's alright, honey. This is just something to help you sleep." "What is it, ma'am?" "It's a medicine called fentanyl." Fentanyl. Same name as the monster that had killed my cousin Wallace. And I still don't know the rules. The second story. I've survived the obesity boot camp. I've always had problems with my weight, as far as I can remember. When I was just 11 I'd been diagnosed with first-degree obesity, and with time things got only worse. Bullying at school, inability to participate in most activities that required anything more than just sitting and watching, disrespect and laughs from kids in my neighborhood. As I grew up, I didn't develop any good social skills that could help me in socializing, like being that funny guy or being a shoulder to cry on. No, I was just a thing inside of myself, who knew nothing better than devouring tons of ice cream and chicken wings to eat out all those insults and stress they caused. I felt trapped and alone. It was an infinite loop. I've made some attempts to become a better self through the years. Oh, I can't remember all those this is the day moments, when I got up and went jogging, only to find myself spitting the lungs out after a couple of hundred of meters, or even less, and of course, such demotivating did no good, so those days never ever turned into those weeks or those couple of days at least. I wish, as I grew up, finished the school, got into college and graduated, the problem didn't perish. Quite the opposite, it became worse. I got myself some health issues, I could barely get out of bed at some point. My life became a succession of depression, self-pity and depression. But as you know, behind every successful man stands a brilliant woman. That woman for me was named Heather. One day as I was sitting by my desk, going through forms and reports I had to submit, she walked into the office. Heather was the intern, who would stay with us for half a year, and our boss, who introduced her, said she had really high hopes that this will grow in further employment. As I saw the beauty of her smile, her cascading platinum hair and those eyes, I knew she was the one. But I couldn't find the courage to speak to her, not even speaking of asking her out. That day I decided that I have 6 months to shape myself, find my spine and get her to know the better me. Period. Believe it or not, next couple of weeks were my proudest. I got myself a gym pass, threw out all the junk stuff from my fridge, read ton of articles on diets and how to lose weight. I must admit, that was also the hardest time of my life. Plus, my budget was gone. I had a pretty average job, no savings or good friends to borrow from. So as a result, I was on my own. No personal trainers or trendy food products, no exotic fat-burning pills or whatsoever. Dang, even healthy eating they talk about on the health forums is expensive as hell compared to my previous diet. But despite all the difficulties, I had some good news. Firstly, my doctor said that, even though my health is not perfect, I could go for a light to moderate exercise load. And secondly, after just 2 weeks there was some obvious progress. I've lost a couple of kilos. The bad part in it was that it was not nearly enough. I had a lot of work to do. And I did my best every single day. I found the will inside and didn't go cold turkey even once, though temptations were all around. The hardest part was when we had taco day at work. The smells almost knocked me off, but I pulled myself together and didn't take anything else but some bowl of salad with feta cheese, completely ignoring a couple of laughs at my back from some of the guys. 3 months later I've stepped on the weights and my happiness knew no boundaries. I was steadily losing weight. Seeing it melting skyrocketed my mood. I can do this, I've said to myself back then. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning of this whole story. A week later I've discovered that the scales don't show any change compared to the previous result. It felt like I even gained some. With heavy feeling nesting inside of me, I understood that I'd hit the so-called plateau, the period when you reach your maximum potential at the time, and no matter what you do, you can't change it. Here, the stale potential meant my weight, which also meant that my chances with Heather were growing thin. I had less than 3 months left to hit my milestone. And even though I did some colossal work on myself and got some compliments from coworkers, that was clearly not enough. At first I refused to give up. I've doubled my exercise time, increased weights and decreased food amounts, but that left me exhausted, not improved. I've tried to follow my previous routine, but in the long run, just lost couple more weeks. I was losing the battle I made myself fight, and for another painful fact, I've overheard Heather talking with some other colleagues, that she actually is not really planning to stay with us for longer period, as she got couple of offers from other companies already, so she'd be probably gone by the end of her internship. Yes, I know. At this point you're probably asking, what was I thinking working myself out straight to the grave, obsessed with a random girl? But did you actually for once in your life fell in love with somebody? Did you love anybody so much that you decided to change your own life at 180 degrees? So, yeah. There I was, a half-complete man, with an empty wallet, fridge full of spinach and fat-free dairy products and a yearning under the heart. You know, if at that point somebody would come in and suggest me a guy, who knows a guy, who can get me a tapeworm, I wouldn't really think twice. That's how low I was. The solution arrived unexpectedly. I was browsing through some web pages and saw this context ad on one of them. Are you not happy with your jelly belly? Nothing seems to work? Come train with us. And there was an animated image of a guy transforming from a blob to a muscular dude. Yeah, I know, it looked cheesy AF. But somehow I clicked the banner and went to their site. It was a simple page with "Fight the Fat. Give it a boot" slogan and some info. There was a description of the obesity boot camp for those who lost all hope, as they describe it. Blah blah blah, hundreds of successful graduates, some nutrition facts. Regular stuff. Actually, it didn't look anything impressive. They didn't even have contact phone, not that I wanted to call them. Just the email and address. And there were at least 2 benefits: they were local and so cheap, I could actually afford it. So I thought, what's the harm, and decided to pay them a visit. It was just a half an hour ride from my place, so later that evening I was at the place. It was in the industrial district close to the city edge, and it took me some time to find the right building. It was a large hangar-type structure surrounded with mesh fence, and probably that should raise a couple of flags. But hey, I've seen couple of videos people doing CrossFit in places much worse than that. It had no signs or advertising around, just a couple of ordinary sheets of paper adjusted together with tape and big plain letters printed on, "Obesity Boot Camp." There were 2 sets of doors, a regular one and the big gate, probably for industrial machines to go through and out. Again, potential red flag. But the whole cocktail of desperation, being broke and a pinch of hope made me ignore it. Besides, probably, as those guys charge so little for their training, they can't afford fancy stuff yet, my exact thought at the moment. So I grabbed myself, pulled the door handle and stepped in. And that was the last thing I remember about that day. I woke up surrounded with complete darkness, so deep I couldn't see the tips of my fingers. To be honest, at that very moment I didn't even panic, as I couldn't understand where I was and what happened. It all came moments later. Suddenly, I've realized that I cannot move. No, not like that. I wasn't restrained or cuffed, no. My whole body itched. I could feel something touching my shoulder and my another shoulder, and my back. As realization kicked in, the heart started to skip beats. I was kept in a squatting position in a room so tight, that I could not turn around. And what's even worse, the ceiling on top was touching my shoulder blades. But the real horror began as my brain registered that there's also no way back or forward, as if I was sitting in a box made of concrete. I couldn't stretch my arms or legs, lie down, stand up. I could barely turn my body an inch. I began screaming uncontrollably, losing my sanity in a flood of primal fear that drowned the crumbling pieces of my ability to think rationally. I think I've passed out right away. But it's hard to tell. I woke up, dreaming that it all was a nightmare and I'm still in my bed. That all of this was caused by stress and my inability to hit my goals. But again, as I've opened my eyes, there was nothing but pitch black. And the smell of my urine, as I must have lost control over my bladder as I've lost consciousness. Another thing I understood, my pants are still dry, because I wasn't wearing them. I was completely naked. I've tried to listen, if I could hear anything around, not a sound. I've tried shouting on top of my lungs asking for help, screaming something about that I have money if they want it, begging, threatening that people know where I am and will go to police. Nothing. Absolute nothingness. Pretty soon my whole body began to shake because of my pose, exhaustion and that weight that made it even harder. Worst thing was, I couldn't even collapse. Somehow I pulled my shoulders together, tossed my body around and was able to land on my ass. It felt much better at that time. Then I've started to think about possible ways out. If they put me in, there has to be a door, or an opening. But soon I gave up on that idea. After what must have felt like hours of touching and pushing my surroundings, I didn't find more than solid concrete. Left, right, bottom, top. Even if there was a secret door or something, it probably would open only outside. Another discovery was that the walls were covered with moist moss and there were a couple of slimy things poking from it. As I've inspected them blindly with my fingers, I came with the conclusion that those were mushrooms. I had no track of time there. What does it matter if it's night or day? Monday or Friday when you can't see anything than abyss gazing back at you. My only clock was my own body. At first I got the sense of reality only by intense pain in my limbs or my arse from sitting in the same position, so I had to twirl in my stone prison just like a blind helpless maggot on a frying pan, trying to displace my hurting parts to relieve the pain from the pressure. I had a lot of time to think. I thought about how I would die. Would it be from thirst, hunger, blockage of blood vessels or something worse? But somehow I've managed through. I lived of licking the moist from the walls and eating moss and mushrooms. At first it really bothered me if those were poisonous and would end my life in painful convulsions, but as time passed, that ending started to seem not that grim after all, so I gave it a try and ate one. I didn't throw up or feel any pain. I didn't die with foam bursting out of my mouth or whatever poisonous mushrooms do to your body. Thirst was actually much worse. I've sat there with a constant headache and charred lips, licking them all the time with my swollen cracked tongue dreaming of nothing more but regular glass of water. It was absolutely inhuman. I've lost a lot of water at the same time. I'll spare you the sensitive details, but soon my prison space smelled like the worst pits of hell. At first I was thinking of drinking my own urine to maintain the water balance, but it was practically impossible considering the pose I was staying at and my ability to move. Honestly, I don't know how I didn't lose my sanity back there. There must have been something in me that helped me, or I am just that stupid to realize the whole spectrum of terror I was trapped in. Some infinity later, and I could never tell how much time of endless waking up with hunger and thirst, and stink and misery, and thoughts of my demise passed in this void of dark and concrete, I developed some nasty cough. So probably it would be tuberculosis that will kill me, just a thought in my head, no regret, no panic. By the time I had a pretty thick beard and mustache, my hair all greasy and grown, my skin itching of dirt, and only God knows how I didn't get any infection from all the SHT I was sitting in. Every movement returned with intense pain, my throat burned with fire, my lungs were suffocating me. And then I heard, as if somebody standing in a building across the road screaming. The sound was coming heavily muted from somewhere above. It was a person screaming. As suddenly it started, it stopped, just to be picked up with another scream. This time the voice was more high-pitched, as if the woman was shrieking. And another one. And another one. They were starting and ending in mere moments and sounded just as if they were getting closer to me. I've probably started to hear better as I can't rely on my sight, so the hearing got enhanced. The thought went through my mind, and as I was rolling the thought around, I've heard extremely loud grinding of metal and stone just above my head. My heart froze instinctively as adrenaline caused by sudden fear kicked right into my blood. The ceiling was lifting up, and the light of the thousand suns was getting into myself from the seams between. I've closed my eyes and stretched my arms towards the increasing opening. With my heart beating like a war drum, I was ready to fight for my life with all I had left in my tortured body. As my fingers felt the edge of the hole I've been kept in and a gap big enough for me to get out without hitting my head, I sprang out, almost breaking my hips and my knees, and crawled out shouting like crazy. Surprisingly, as I've stood up on my shaking legs, it became clear that the edge of my prison with the lid off touches my stomach. And then suddenly I heard the round of applause. That was so surprising, I absolutely didn't expect that. Punches, yes, knife stab, probably, gunshot, highly likely. But applause. I couldn't resist to open my eyes to see around. Worst mistake ever. It felt like nails dug deep into my eyeballs instantly. All I could register were the silhouettes of people standing around and myriad of light above. My legs wobbled, I felt like all the blood in my body rushed up and the world around started to spin. The last thing I recall was the slow smooth male voice saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next graduate, George." I woke up in the hospital. I've been put into medical coma due to the condition my body was in. I had severe muscle atrophy, dehydration, malnutrition, and bunch of other stuff that traumatized me for life. Doctors said I was lucky enough not to get some irreversible damage to my health that would turn lethal in the long run. But since that incident I walk with the cane and it is staying with me till I die. 7 more people were discovered in conditions similar to me, all at random locations across our city. Not all were as lucky as I, some of them ended in asylum, some in the cemetery. Police checked the address for the boot camp but couldn't find anything but cells we've been kept in. No sign of our captors, not a single fingerprint or DNA trace. Yes, even the serious guys were there to check. The website went down just hours after I disappeared, meaning I was the unlucky last. I've spent more than 3 months in a stone tomb. I've survived the obesity boot camp. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.